Welcome to the second module of a three-part series on parent-centered planning for parents with disabilities. This is part 2, parent-centered planning, roots in person-centered planning. My name is Elizabeth Lightfoot, and I'm a professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. This module series is hosted by the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare, also at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. And I would like to acknowledge my other funders for this research related to this module series, most notably the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, which has funded my research on parent-centered planning through the National Research Center for Parents with Disabilities, which is at Brandeis University, as well as the Minnesota Agricultural Experiment Station, which has a number of my studies related to parents with disabilities in the child welfare system. This is a three-part module series. The first module was about the current state of the research on working with parents with disabilities. This module is about parent-centered planning's roots in person-centered planning. And module 3 is about the parent-centered planning brief intervention. So in this module, I'll talk a little bit about the research about parents with disabilities needing parental supports. The second part will be about person-centered planning, which is ubiquitous in the field of disabilities, disability services and supports. And finally, we'll talk about our modification to person-centered planning, which we're calling parent-centered planning. So there are a few supports available supporting parenting for people with disabilities. Supports in general for people with disabilities, as defined by the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or AAIDD, are technologies or personal supports that enhance individual functioning. So the focus is on supports that can help people with disabilities as individuals fulfill important life roles. And the life roles that is envisioned by AAIDD are roles such as being an employee, being a community member, being a member of a religious community, being a neighbor, but it doesn't extend to the role of being a parent. And so what we're suggesting, and we've been writing about this for a while, is that this concept of individual supports could be thought of as parental supports or family supports to enhance family functioning instead of individual functioning. And so when we think of parental supports to enhance family functioning, that technologies and the personal supports would be things related to parenting. Technologies could be something like adaptive equipment for parenting, such as an adaptive crib, or using some type of personal digital device like a smartphone to keep track of parenting activities. And personal supports would be any support designed to assist parents with a disability to parent, such as daycare, homework, in-home training, those sorts of personal supports that assist with parenting. And we've been thinking about this and writing about this for a while. So you can read more about this in an article we wrote 10 years ago called Parental Supports for Parents with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And this resource, as well as all the resources that I talk about in this three-part module series, you can find on the module homepage in the bibliography. So you can find links to all of these resources. We did a study a few years ago about the supports for parents with disabilities, where we asked parents with disabilities what types of supports they received and what types of supports they needed and which supports they preferred. And we found that there was a strong preference among parents with disabilities in our study for informal supports. They like the flexibility of informal supports. And these are supports from their family members or friends, like the flexibility. The family and friends can call right back when they have help. They like the breadth of the types of informal supports they can get, such as childcare within their own family context. So they like this informal nature and the not having to plan ahead. And they also appreciated the emotional support that they got from their informal supports. For example, one person says, they listen. If I need a break, they would be there sometimes. Someone else said, God keeps me spiritually grounded. The rest, he has sent them to help me. And the rest that person was talking about were her informal supports, her family and friends. And people in our study experienced mixed reactions with their formal supports. They often described formal supports as confusing or overwhelming. One person said, wow, it is like people coming out at the same time. They had the sense of being overwhelmed. It was like nonstop. Someone was coming into the home constantly until 8 p.m. at night. But others did talk very positively about their particular formal support providers and thought that their formal support providers, whether they were social workers or in-home assistants, were very helpful individuals. But we did find that people did not get the types of supports that they needed, and that there was a great need for both more formal and informal supports. So we developed the parent-centered planning intervention for a couple of reasons. And in the last module, we talked about how most of the interventions that focus on supporting parents with disabilities focus either on parent skill development or providing social support to parents with disabilities in structured social support groups. We developed a parent-centered planning intervention to fill the unmet need of an intervention focused on increasing supports for parenting. So beyond just parent skill training and parent support, but on increasing supports for parenting. And the parent-centered planning intervention was developed with funding from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research through a subcontract from the National Research Center for Parents with Disabilities. So what we did is we modified the person-centered planning model for parenting. And the person-centered planning has been around for over 30 years in the area of disabilities. And it was developed by Jack Pierpont, John O'Brien, and other colleagues, with a focus being on the goal of the person with the disability, and that you should develop plans and services and support based on what the person with disability wants, and then use the person's goals and desires as the focus for goal setting and breaking down goals into actionable steps to help them achieve their goals. Our modification focuses directly on parents and parenting. So we're taking this person-centered planning approach and changing it to focus on parents and parents' goals and needs. So person-centered planning is essentially helping people with disabilities plan for the future. And when it was designed, it was this radical departure from how people with disabilities were getting services, where it was usually planned for by experts and others about what they thought a person with disabilities should be doing. So this was a radical change. Now we're seeing it all over in social service design and planning, is that we have these person-centered models where we're letting our services be driven by the personal needs and desires of a person with a disability, or at least that's our ideal. A key part of person-centered planning is that the person and their family and friends are the main sources of input. So we're not getting input from experts who are assessing what a person needs or assessing what's available and matching the needs, but rather we're talking to the person with disability and maybe their family and friends to get input on what a person with a disability wants or needs. And so they often use the language of the focus person. So the focus person is the person with a disability. The role of the experts, and there can be experts in the process, are only to serve as facilitators or perhaps to provide some input on services available. But the main role of experts is to facilitate this process. And person-centered planning usually has a trained facilitator whose training is in facilitating these types of person-centered planning processes. The process itself uses structured exercises to focus on the strengths, preferences, and possibilities for the person with a disability. The person-centered planning meetings can be in a person's home or at a comfortable meeting space. Often it's in a person's home and there's a poster paper put up on a wall or a tripod during the meeting so that everyone can see what is being recorded. And it's usually recorded in words and pictures. And there's different models for doing this, but they usually involve using graphics to sort of illustrate what the person with a disability and their supportive people are talking about when they're talking about their dreams or their challenges and their goals and steps to achieve these goals. Now, thinking about this in the 2021 context, we could think of this being done digitally too, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be done even in person now that we can do meetings over Zoom pretty well. So I could picture this being, a new technologically assisted person-centered planning process. But traditionally, this has been done in a comfortable meeting place, such as a person's home or maybe a community center or other place where they're comfortable. And when the person centered planning meeting is happening, these are the types of questions that are being asked. And it depends on who the person is and where they are. These person centered planning meetings are happening with youth who are transitioning to adulthood. But generally, they're asking questions about the gifts and strengths of an individual with a disability, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what types of help do they need, who helps them when they need help, what types of activities a person likes. And a lot of talk about what are their dreams for the future. So a person can have an idea for what they want their life to look like, what the possibilities are for their life. And then it can get in more specifics, such as where do you want to live? What type of place? What town? Which city? What types of job do you want? What do you need to keep a job? Who do you like to hang around with? What do you like to do in your spare times? So you can see the focus is on what the individual's dreams and desires are. After doing those types of discussions, then it goes into making actionable steps. And there's different formats for doing this, but actionable steps to help people build on these strengths. It's a strengths based approach to lead them towards making progress towards their goals. And there's many different person-centered planning guides or processes. Some of the most common ones, which you can purchase guidebooks for from Inclusion Press, are MAPS, which is making action plans together, and PATH, which is planning alternative tomorrows with hope. And these are related ones, and they're both visual guides that people can use to lead a person with disabilities towards making plans and setting actionable goals and taking steps towards reaching these goals. There's other types as well, such as whole life planning and essential lifestyle planning. And there's also more specific types of person centered planning that are related to specific aspects of a person's life, such as focusing particularly on transition. And you can look again in our bibliography on the main module webpage where you can find a list to links for how you can purchase or get a hold of these types of person centered planning guides. So what we did is we modified person-centered planning and made our version focusing directly on parents or parenting. And we are inspired by the PATH model, which I described before, which was developed by Jack Pierpont, John O'Brien, and Marcia Forrest, which is called Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. But we changed it to parent-centered planning. And quickly, what path model looks like, and this is a simplified version, and pay attention to the numbers which indicate the sequencing of how you would do this process. And I will just go through this very briefly. Is first, you would focus on a person's North Star or their dream. And then, second, you would have the person and their supportive people, families, and friends talking about their understanding of that goal and what that goal is. And then you would jump back to the present and talk about what a person's situation is right now, and then talk about who you would need to recruit or enroll or commit to helping a person achieve their goal. Talk about personal development that a person would need, such as more education or training, or what they would need to do to get more prepared to take steps towards reaching their goal. And then you would think of the different strategies that would be needed to reach the goal and list out the strategies. And then you break down the strategies into actionable steps. So you develop these next steps in number 7. And then you leave the meeting deciding what the very first step a person is going to do to make progress towards reaching their goal and maybe even their North Star. So that's generally what the PATH model looks like. And there's been various alterations to this model over the years, and it's been very common in disability planning and with services and advocates using this across North America and really across the world. And so what we have been inspired by this, but we've changed this to focus specifically on parenting. So we're calling it parent-centered planning. And a lot of it is similar to the general ideas of person-centered planning. So in parent-centered planning, the parent with a disability is at the center of the planning and decision making. But this can be a little more complex when we're talking not just about an individual, but we're talking about a family. So it could also include the children, depending how old they are and what their goals and needs are. And often parents are co-parenting one way or the other. And so it might involve parents together being involved in this process. Similar to person-centered planning, supportive people are invited to participate to provide input and guidance, but not to direct the nature of the goals. This will involve structured exercises that focuses on the strengths and preferences of the focused person, which is the parent with a disability and his or her children, but it's about the strengths and preferences related to parenting. And finally, in our model, because we're advocating that this could be used within service provisions such as in child welfare or disability services, that we're suggesting that maybe a trained social worker should facilitate the intervention and monitor the goal achievement in partnership with the parent with the disability, which is a departure from person-centered planning, which does involve training for a facilitator, but the facilitator is not an expert and doesn't do follow-up training and matching people with services, as we're suggesting might be helpful for parents with disabilities who have such limited options for services. So that is the key overview of person-centered planning and our adoption of parent-centered planning. In module 3, we go into much more detail in what parent-centered planning looks like and how it can be used as a brief intervention and the particular steps, and we will also provide a case example. For more resources about person-centered planning or parent-centered planning, if you go to the main module page, we have our parent-centered planning manual about our parent-centered planning intervention, a bibliography that lists all of the resources that we mentioned in this module series, along with a lot of other resources, such as research articles, podcasts, practice notes that you can look at online. This is the end of module 2. And again, module 3 is about the parent-centered planning brief intervention. I hope you have found this useful, and I hope that you will listen also to module 3, where I talk more about the parent-centered planning brief intervention. Thank you for listening.